In Act One, there are a variety of subplots that begin to emerge. I mean, they are endless. uh, Bartolo arrives and he has issues, and then there's Marcelina, and Carabino, and everybody's making an appearance. This is a very well populated work.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go into Carabino. He's the next person that sort of plays very interestingly. And how do you look at that character of Carabino? I wanted just to talk on him for a bit because he fits in a very unusual way.
Well, Carabino, I see. Well, the main thing I see in Carabino, and which is why, because young teenager full of raging hormones, basically acting inappropriately the entire opera. What I see in Figaro is, first of all, because of his age, I feel I can take advantage of that and get my pokes in at Carabino. Carabino is basically a perfect representation of the Count, 10, 15 years earlier. And this is the direction in which he's headed. This is a guy who will be the Count one day. Will have a position such as that. So, there's a lot.
Which is underlined, I believe, with his fascination with the Countess, because, as you say, I think you've really put that adroitly, and that really does tell us a little bit more about Carabino, where he's going, and so would you say that Figaro has some sort of, because he has already had this very involved relationship with Almaviva, that he sort of sees like almost like a younger Carabino and looks at him accordingly, being brought back to his earlier years himself. Now we go to that to finish off Act One with Non Più Andrai. Let's talk about that air for a little bit. Give me your take on that air and how you approach it.
Sure. Well, talking about just what we were discussing about the relationship with Carabino, basically sending this young kid off to war and all that's involved with that, and in front, depending on the production, but in this case, I very much like that everybody's sort of on the scene, on the set at the time, and just making sort of a public mockery of Carabino and making fun of the situation as part of the grand plot, because we know from the underlying part of the story that Figaro will catch Carabino before he leaves and has this whole scheme planned for him. But in a gesture to the Count, gets to sort of poke fun at Carabino, who has been a thorn in his side for the entire first act and will be for the entire show. I mean, the Count is fed up with this kid. So I get to do a little, sort of double play here. I get to make fun of the Carabino, who's just also irritating beyond belief to me, flirting with Susanna as well as the Countess. So there's a sort of mixed thing here, getting to sort of tease the Carabino in front of the Count, in front of all who are on stage, while also, just getting my own jabs in, so to speak, in a very sort of subtle way. But I've got to sort of keep Carabino on my good side, because I do have a plan for him in my plot later.
And I see that I see that as we get into Act Two, that Figaro has decided that he's going to be sending these anonymous letters. Now, as a person, look at that today, would you think that was really the smartest road to take? I mean, there's reality, and then there's Figaro in the opera. How do you look at that?
Well, what do you mean with the letters and things like that?
Yes.
Well, it sounds like a pretty clever plot, to be honest with you. Obviously, what happens is Susanna and Countess eventually create their own scheme, to which I'm completely oblivious, which is what, to me, looks to be the ultimate deception. Not only the Count would be one to do so, but it seems like the Susanna has instigated it herself. So even, perhaps the ladies sort of see the flaws in my plan and decide to make one of their own. Again, sort of this whole different, turning things upside down a little bit, where the women are outsmarting the men and the servant class is outsmarting and outwitting the upper class. Again, this sort of
which is
everything.
Something which is something that you see in a lot of Mozart's work. There's a lot of, he works a lot of with class structures and, you know, the intermingling of these two very formal sections of society at that period. Now, let's move a little bit more into Act Two, and tell me, in your estimation, how Figaro continues to develop within the work in Act Two.
Well, we see basically in Act Two the only instance where Figaro and the Countess, who we haven't talked a lot about, have interacted, because now, of course, the Countess has been elevated to this station, but there's all the backstory with the Rosina of the first play. And there's this one scene where he basically comes to the ladies and says, I've got this plan, we're going to do this with the letter, blah, blah, blah. He speaks to her in a very informal language. The Italian is speaking to her in the informal, as opposed to the formal, which is typical for, you know, how underclass would do to the uppers. So that's an interesting development that, honestly, not knowing the language, you may not recognize. But this is an important element within the relationships, that he does keep it very casual with her. So that's one part of the character development and the character interaction that I think is important not to miss. And then you sort of, well, I mean, in Act Two, you have the most incredible piece of the entire work, in my opinion, the Act Two finale, which is just one thing on top of another. All the layers get added in with all the characters. By the end of the scene, it's just builds to create absolute chaos. And it's just basically, you know, with what is this, and then all the scheming that goes on, and I'm having to act quickly on my feet to try to cover my tracks about. I mean, I don't need to tell you the whole complicated plot.
No,
but basically,
Act Two is crazy.
Yeah, it's great. It's great because just when we've gotten out of it now, and we're about to make our exit, the next thing comes in. Antonio comes in and goes, oh, here we go again. We deal with that. He's out. Then we sort of resolve that. Then we start to leave again, and then the three, as we call it, the baddies, come into town. The three villains of the thing at this point in the opera come in, and it just and the musical effect of it, the character effect of it, it's just one of the most exquisite, wonderful, chaotic, crazy pieces of music that's out there.
Now, the conclusion to this work, as you know, it revolves around a very large, well-built piece of music. How does your Figaro, your particular Figaro, how do you approach that music? It's very difficult to make a character when there are so many people on stage, to make a character really central. How do you exactly do that? I mean, what is it that you do for that character?
Well, as a central character, I mean, that's what Mozart does so well in this. I guess.
Pardon me?
That's okay.
Now, let's move on to Act 3. And we find the wedding has now been postponed because Marcellina has come in, and you owe her money, and it's, we have a situation developing here. Let's talk, set us into that.
Well, here, I mean, probably the most unbelievable plot line of the whole show is what happens in Act 3. Yes, we have basically this trial that happens because at some point, again, in the earlier part of the story that's not told in the Beaumarchais play, I've borrowed money from Marcellina. And since I have not yet repaid her, there is a debt to be paid, and that debt is that I would marry Marcellina. So obviously this whole marriage with Susanna would not happen, and so I basically present it in front of the court, and Bartolo and Basilio and all are there present, so that the Count, in a sense, renders judgment as to what happens. Well, we of course know the Count has his own ulterior motives in this, as to whether I should be married to Susanna and whatnot. It's a card that he gets to play. Well, in the midst of it all, I claiming and asking for more time to seek out my parents, whom I was kidnapped from at a very early age. This is a new plot development that hasn't been told before. We know from the story what happens is ultimately Bartolo and Marcellino happen to be my birth parents. Again, a very unbelievable plot line, but a major twist in the whole foiling of the Count, who just cannot seem to get a break the whole evening, because just when he feels he gets something to hold on to, it disappears. And in this case, yeah, here we have, an incredible plot line, and it's very funny and very humorous. And of course, how do you play that into the realism of the rest of the entire play? Yeah, it's a little unbelievable, but if you buy into it, it's very funny.
Well,